Hello, and welcome to episode 183 of Prog Review. And if you've not been following the thread, we're doing this thing about concept albums. Oh yes, indeed. Now, this one's an interesting concept album for you. What happens when Brian Eno takes control of U2 and they record a series of songs that for movies that don't actually exist? I'll tell you. This is what happens. This is Original Soundtracks 1 by Passengers. Oh yes, released in 1995, he said. And so yes, we take a metaphorical left turn with the concept album thread, and we look at an album that was largely ignored at the time, and so languishes in the bargain bins, remember those, of record stores long since shuttered and closed thanks to the impact of digital music and the general lack of interest of the youth today. Naughty youth today, get out and buy a record, you lazy bums. The concept itself wasn't new. Producing soundtracks for movies that don't exist is pretty much standard fare for Brian Eno. After all, he'd put 3 albums together called Music for Films, which again were concept pieces working around the idea of creating virtual soundtracks. Actually, the original intention for this album was to actually produce a proper soundtrack, and that soundtrack was to be for Peter Greenaway's The Pillow Book movie, starring Ewan Look at My Swinging Dick McGregor. That ain't a lightsaber, oh no. But unfortunately the project came to naught, and so Eno took over and said, hey, let's carry on, let's produce some more imaginary music soundtracks. And seeing at the time the US charts were dominated by movie soundtrack albums, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Oh, it was a good idea at the time. How many times have we heard that? And so the band set to work and engaged in jamming together in the studio to video clips taken from various movies. Eno was very enthused by this method and impressed by the naturally organic flow that the sessions were taking. And the idea was to produce something more conservative than a regular U2 album and to create a mellow nighttime record. The band even brought in producer Howie B, big name at the time, to edit down several hours of improvisations into something a bit more marketable. I mean, if you're interested in how this album was put together, it's well documented in Brian Eno's Diaries, A Year with Swollen Appendices, which is a very, very good read. It's a good read, it's a great read. I've got the limited edition with the little pinky bit at the back. Oh, a great book. I wonder if this is worth anything. Anyone know? I don't know. But yeah, I must read it again sometime. Lots of photoshopping, making women's bottoms bigger. That's what Mr. Eno spends his time doing. So yeah, the detail that the band put into the album is illustrated very well in the liner notes, in which Ben O'Ryan and CSJ Beaufop, they're made up names. They're yeah. They actually sat down and write synopses for the movies that are featured on the soundtrack, these make-believe movies. But in fact, 3 of the movies do actually exist, and they are Ghost in the Shell, Miss Sarajevo and Beyond the Clouds. So now you know, it's not totally fake. Now, before you roll your eyes and cross your arms like this and go, I fucking hate you two, me, I fucking hate them. You don't be too quick to dismiss this album. It's certainly more progressive than anything Dream Theater has ever put out. Was that okay, Mr. One Singularity? Did I get it in okay? Was that good? Okay. And if you enjoy the ambient works of Brian Eno, there's plenty to enjoy here. The album opens up with United Colours and the sound of the metronome before electronica and treated saxophone come in. And those of you expecting U2 will suddenly think, what is this I'm actually listening to? It's a scattering, surreal and texturally interesting piece of electronica. And that's the general theme of the album, is electronica. Slug is all drum machine and treatments. And you can hear the Eno influence all over the album. He's there even on the vocal performance from Mr. Bono. It's an unusually dreamlike piece, and there's a strange melancholic undercurrent running through it, and it leads us into Your Blue Room, which does sound like a U2 B-side. In fact, it was actually one, and it was on the single Staring at the Sun, which appeared 2 years later. Again, this song is dreamlike and hypnotic and features some great Eno-esque backing vocals. And Eno's got a thing about his backing vocals. He says it's the secret to a hit song is the backing vocals. Always Forever Now sees the band return into electronica mode, and this is a thumping piece of work dominated by the bass, with some interesting textures being put forward and a great resolution at the end. Eno takes centre stage with A Different Kind of Blue, a spoken word piece that wouldn't have gone amiss on Another Day on Earth, Eno's last spoken album. And it is complete with random electronic percussion and heavily treated vocals. And this segues into the utterly marvellous beach sequence, which is completely and utterly transporting and totally unlike U2. And again, this segues into probably the greatest song U2, Passengers, ever released. I'm of course talking about Miss Sarajevo, which comes out of Bono's involvement with an American journalist called Bill Carter, who was making a documentary about Sarajevo's underground resistance movement during the Bosnian War. Remember that. At the heart of the film is this beauty pageant being held of a war-torn Sarajevo. They want life to carry on regardless. And the song, is based on that, and it's a protest to that war. And it criticises the international community for not doing anything to halt the conflict or helping those that are affected by it. Again, this is an historical piece. So this is a very political song, and though if you don't know the background to it, or just listen to it on a very superficial level, its deeper meaning might pass you by. It's the most U2 thing on the album, but again, Eno has his fingerprints all over it. But instead of letting the song plod along on the middle ground, the performance is elevated to cosmic levels by the inclusion of the late great Luciano Pavarotti blasting his lungs out and turning this into something quite spectacular. And every time I hear this song, a lump forms in my throat and tears well in my eyes. And when Pavarotti starts to sing, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Magnificent, just magnificent. I can say no more about it other than that this is truly progressive music, because it melds different genres into something new and generally different and exciting. This is the definition of progressive, this song itself. And this takes us into Ito Okashi, which is a very different song completely. It's got Japanese style percussion and Japanese stylings, complete with vocal performance from a singer called Holy. The song is almost like a palate cleaner, palate cleanser after Miss Sarajevo, and takes you to a very different mental space. But then we're back to more familiar territory with 1 Minute Warning, and the band throw the entire package of electronic trickery at this instrumental landscape until it resolves itself with some Brian Eno vocals in the final movement. Corpse, These Chains Are Way Too Long is the strangest thing on the record. It's part Radiohead experiment, part messed up 21st century blues song. It's unique in this set. It's it's unique. It's again totally unlike U2 or Bono. His performance is almost like Tom Waits or Tom York even. The mood of the album is lightened by Elvis Ate America, which can only be described as a bent up and broken tribute to the king of rock and roll, though with great humour. And it stands out on the album for not quite fitting in with the whole concept. It's too much of a distinct song to be on a soundtrack or anything. It's just, you got to hear it. It just doesn't fit. Plot 180 or plot 100, 180, plot 180, 180, plot 180, 180. Again, sounds like Brian Eno's solo album Cast Off. Features scattery drum beats and backed with cloudy guitar tones and some very interesting atmospheres in there. Meanwhile, Theme from The Swan takes a very minimalistic turn, complete with rain on a tin roof sound effects, and is very moody and evocative. The album is finished off with the thumping theme from Let's Go Native, which is all drum loop and bass line. There's not much to this song, and it's a shame that this is the lead out piece, because it isn't that memorable and it doesn't really shout out, this is our final statement for the album. And so the album ends with a whimper rather than a bang, if you will. Now, this album has a very special place in my heart, partly because of the single Miss Sarajevo, and partly because the in-laws bought this for me as my Christmas present back in 1995. I can imagine that many of you will be throwing your hands up and claiming, oh, this album is progressive, and you know what, you'd be wrong for many reasons. One, this is U2 at the height of their powers, casting off their name, off the brand, a bit like Beatles and, you know, adopting the mantle of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to liberate themselves from their legacy. Two, there's not one song on this album that really sounds like U2 at that time. They reinvented themselves for one record and created something truly unique. Three, the concept of producing a series of fake soundtracks is way out there enough when it comes to things progressive. Come on, we can give them that. And four, Brian Eno. The man shits progressive, breathes progressive, and eats progressive for breakfast every morning. He alone gets them through the door. All right. Now, I think this is a remarkable, if underrated album, and yes, it's a load of pretentious twaddle, but then so is all progressive rock. You know, you have to turn off the, you know, choose to turn off the filter and let it in. You know, let it into your heart. You know, if you know what I mean. But here is a band thrown off the chains of convention, produced an album that didn't sell very well, but they were still creating an artistic statement with it. It's utterly fascinating, and even, you know, and if you are an Eno fan, you're going to be in luck if you haven't discovered this album, because he's all over it. You know, it's like a hidden Eno masterpiece. Now, in terms of a rating, I'm giving this a very healthy 5 blue rooms out of 5. That's 5 blue rooms out of 5. I can't help myself. I'm sorry. And that's it. My name's been Darren Lock. I've been talking about Passengers, original soundtracks 1. And, well, yeah, that's it. Yeah, original soundtracks 1. I didn't do a follow-up. And hopefully you've enjoyed it. My name's been Darren Lock, and I've been talking about this record. I've just repeated myself. It's getting late, and I'm running. My mind's running. My mind's running adrift. I don't know what the next one's going to be. I don't know yet. It'll be a surprise. I haven't worked out yet. But it'll be another concept album. We're getting through them. It might be some Moody Blues. It might not be. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows what the postman might bring? And that's that. Only one more thing to say, and that is Prog on.